Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Matthew Pollock. I'm a grad student at Indiana University, and I'm going to be talking today about sociophonetic variation in Spanish political discourse, specifically Andalusian Spanish political discourse. So, there is a really rich body of research that's already been done on political speech and sociophonetics and style shifting in English, in American Congress, with the Obamas, with British Parliament, the Queen. I'm not going to go into that too much here, though. I do want to look a little bit more at the couple studies that there have been in Spanish. In specifically southern Spain, Cruz Ortiz has looked at the way that speakers converge towards Madrid norms, looking at politicians across a 40-year period, finding that individual style shifting is very common. And then Hernandez Campoy and Cotillas Espinosa did this really interesting series of studies on a former female president of the region of Murcia, which is in the southeast, finding that using this composite of regional variants, they determined that she was essentially hyper vernacular, is the term that they use, that she is using more regional variants than a lot of the male older speakers in her own region. And in an interview with her, they found that she said that she was using this identity work intentionally, that she wanted to come across as the working class speaker that she saw herself as, although arguably she was not. They say that the use of these local features associated with the working class world might be a strategic way of building a particular image and projecting her socialist identity. In contrast, the use of standard features may be associated with conservative ideas. So it's sort of based on that idea that I entered into this project both from a statistical standpoint and also I wanted to do a bit of qualitative work determining exactly how style shifting was occurring. Taking speaker design as a foundation from Coupland, this idea that, of course, linguistic resources and even regional variants can help speakers develop identity, social structure, beliefs. We see that politicians are doing the same thing, that they're connecting with voters, they have to distance themselves from the opposition, and they have to consider social variables and how they're coming across. LFI, lectal focusing and interaction, traces this variation in real time. Sharma and Sharma and Rampton have done some interesting studies of individuals and showing how style shifting can be sort of visualized and allowing you to see when regional productions dip or rise and be able to explain why that might be. So this current study looks at 5 phenomena in Andalusia, Spain. That's that southern region there on the map. That includes intervocalic D deletion, which is a national phenomenon but is most frequent in Andalusia. Coda S aspiration and deletion, which is a stereotype of Andalusian Spanish. Fronting of the affricate ch to ts. I have done a little bit of work on that, but there's not much else in Spain that discusses this phenomenon if it is really widespread. Saseo, this is a pre-vocalic S dentalization. It's a stereotype that is stigmatized in Andalusia. And finally, the liquid contrast neutralization or elision of L and the tap R. This is also a stereotype mainly in Eastern Andalusia, but it occurs throughout the region. My research questions then, based on that, were sort of twofold and then something a little bit broader. So community norms based on a sociolinguistic and quantitative analysis, what variation, social or linguistic, is there in a community of politicians for these processes? Then taking the LFI approach, which regional variants are used fruitfully in style shifting and how do these uses differ across phenomena? And then finally, how does this compare to previous research as a sort of sanity check? Do findings at the group and individual level reflect what we've seen in the English context or in other Spanish contexts, and what might that mean? So methods-wise, I wanted to look at 2 political parties in Spain. I selected 3 different speech contexts, scripted speech, and then interviews with male and female interlocutors. And I chose the 2 largest political parties in Spain, the largest conservative and liberal party, the PP and the PSOE, the Popular Party and the Socialist Workers' Party. Gender, I chose male and female identifying speakers, and this all took place, or this all was from speakers in the city of Seville, specifically, the capital of Andalusia. So, corpus information, this used online scripted speeches and unscripted interviews, and these were individuals with comparable political status, either presidents or mayors or people who were comparable in that way. There were 8 speakers overall, divided by party, gender, and speech context. That made 24 total audio files. For stage 1 with the community norms, I was looking at 1 minute per file, looking at several acoustic measures that made sense for each of the different phenomena, and I did conduct interpretive reliability to determine that there was agreement with the way that I was coding. Versus for stage 2, with electoral focusing in interaction analysis, I took 5 minutes for 2 individual speakers and looked at the way that style shifting was occurring based on small segmented blocks, so 15-second blocks, to determine how much regional variation was occurring in each of them. So here's a couple of examples of what I would have seen. So this is comunidades, communities. We see that there's no real occlusion here for the 2 Ds, but there is the presence of an S. Versus with this example, Podemo, we have the occlusion for a D, but not much seems to be occurring for an S. It's maybe aspiration or elision. And then in this example, El Muchacho, we see that then an L is produced, but then there's a much higher COG for the ts production than the ch production of the affricate. I'm going to play a couple of these audios. And just in these examples, you'll see the parentheticals are instances where things have been elided. Okay, so that was one. So a lot more production here, but some elision and affronting. A lot of elision here of S and some fronting of the affricate. Okay, so moving into the community norms, I was looking at productions as the expected/prestige variant. This was treated as a non-regional variant, and all other productions were treated as regional variants. These were analyzed together in one model. I did do some later work dividing them out, but I'm not going to focus on that in this presentation today. The independent variables included age, gender, party, and context. So we see in this model that later in interviews, speakers were more likely to use a regional variant. So over time, as potentially formality decreased or something along those lines, with female interlocutors as opposed to male interlocutors or in speeches, we said were more regional productions, which is interesting. But a lot of the variation in this model seems to have been explained by the 2 random effects, which was the individual themselves and the variant. Looking at those variants, we see that coda S is almost always going to be elided and aspirated in Seville, which we would expect. The trilled R and the intervocalic D are produced as the regional elided variants or neutralized variants about half of the time, and the rest have pretty low regional production rates. So variables do not all follow the same pattern, and the question then is going to be what the social meaning of these variants are. We assume that it would be diverse because they are acting in different ways. So looking at the lectal focusing and interaction, I essentially took all of this data and selected out 2 individuals who seemed to differ significantly from the norm in a couple of phenomena and chose to look at them a little closer. So first we have Jose Antonio Perez Tapias. He contested Pedro Sanchez, the current Prime Minister of Spain, in a previous PSOE primary, taking the 3rd place. He was discussing the election, was a little bit angry about it, and talking about what the new party leader had done. We see that there's this one valley here right before an interviewer asks a question, critiquing the same party opponent's attempts at integration and diversity, so critiquing his own party. And then at the end we see this rise in a regional speech as he makes this joke about needing to sweep up domestic issues and try and clean up Spain in some way. And so it's much more lighthearted at that moment. The other speaker I looked at, Teresa Jimenez Becerril, has been in the EU government since 2004. She's been on various parliamentary committees for human rights, social affairs, etc. We see 2 dips and 1 rise here. She's talking about a need for peace and healing between Muslims and Christians in the Middle East, as well as expressing worries about Trump's regard for Europe. And we see this dip in regional speech. Whereas right after an interviewer asks a question, there's this discussion of the difficulties of women advancing in politics, and she seems a lot more candid at that moment. And then I chose one other interview from her. We see there's 2 rises and 2 dips here. So she's talking about the assassination of her brother in Seville by a terrorist group. As she becomes more emotional, talking about her nephew's future and the fact that Seville won't forget her brother, we see a rise in regional speech. And then as she becomes potentially more angry, but also essentially more politically driven, talking about a denunciation of this terrorist group and the no-nonsense policy they have for kidnapping, the regional production drops. So we just see very quickly that in these peaks, a lot of these things are acting alike, but Saseo, interestingly, is actually going the opposite direction. It rises the most in the valleys and falls the most in the peaks. So it's something that I'm going to talk about a little bit as we go into the discussion here. So overall, to answer research question 1, there's a lot of variation. For regional coda S, D, and R, 2 speakers deviate about 10% from the average, but the rest are pretty close. For regional productions of R, the affricate, and Saseo, this varies a lot by individual. They're less frequent overall, but there's a lot more variability. This may be a site where style shifting and identity construction is more available. Regional L is just more rare overall. So then looking at the lectal focusing and interaction, it seems like off-guard speech, maybe sincerity or emotion, is correlating with regional variance, and more guarded speech correlates with non-regional variance. The phenomena, we see that some of these do closely follow regional speech, whereas Saseo seems to be doing the opposite thing, and some of these other variants just aren't available at all for variation. So as to what previous studies have shown, we see that there has been research in English and in Spanish that suggests that politicians follow party lines. And that is happening to a certain extent. Conservatives are actually being a little bit less regional than liberals, but it's not very much, and it's not coming out as statistically significant in this version of the study. And then in the LFI, we see that speakers do style shift a lot. This also supports what Cruz Ortiz showed in Andalusia overall, that style shifting at the individual level among these politicians is possibly more predictive than any single social factor. The final takeaways is that speech communities composed of politicians are a rich site for a sociolinguistic study of variable tendencies. These phenomena vary productively in Andalusian Spain. We see in the LFI that these also vary across time. And then future perceptual research should be used to determine if variation is salient to listeners and associated with actual social evaluations. Bina Ponsoda suggests that Andalusian Spanish is prestigious within the region, although it is stigmatized from the north. So that is something to keep in mind. All right, that's it. Thank you.